Welcome to the Jay Kim Show. This is your host, Jay Kim. I am an investor, author, and fitness entrepreneur, and for the first time in Asia, I sit down with the world's most brilliant minds in business, investing, and entrepreneurship. You'll learn all the secrets, strategies, and formulas to becoming a successful entrepreneur directly from the masters. If this is your first time listening, thank you for stopping by. This podcast is produced every week with the goal of providing actionable insight to you, the listener, with every single episode. And now, on to the show. Today's guest is Ryan Holiday. Ryan is an author and media strategist and the former director of marketing for American Apparel. He's written 5 books now and has advised many prominent best-selling authors, including Tucker Max, Neil Strauss, and Tony Robbins. Ryan's story is particularly interesting because he dropped out of college at the age of 19 to apprentice under famous author Robert Greene. We talk about specifically how his family reacted when they heard the news that he was dropping out of college and how he dealt with this and overcame the challenges of not having a traditional college degree. Ryan's written 3 best-selling books on Stoicism. His latest is called Ego is the Enemy. And I highly recommend you reading this book and learning more about Stoicism. It's sort of practical philosophy that we can use in our everyday lives. I hope you enjoy this episode. Ryan, thanks for coming on. I'm really excited to talk to you. Congratulations on your book launch. It's amazing, sort of the speed in which you pump these books out is amazing. So congratulations, and I think you're doing a great job. I've read all 4 of your books, and each one has some very unique sort of messages, and I think your first one was very eye-opening for me because I don't know anything about sort of the media industry, and so I think that was an eye-opener. And your last 2 especially were more sort of really sort of actionable type books, which I loved. So,
well, thank you.
Yeah. So let's get right into it. I want to first talk about. I think it's so unique that you dropped out of college and you've then just had such incredible success. And I think that, I'm Asian, I'm from the States, but I've been in Hong Kong for probably 11 years now. And the audience here is very, it's obviously very Asian, and doing something like that is unheard of in Asian culture. I mean, it's not exactly encouraged either in Western culture. So I just want to ask you about your experience doing that. What sort of prompted you, pushed you, or pulled you to do that, and how did you so successfully parlay that into your career?
Well, it was a terrifying thing, to be perfectly honest with you. It's not as discouraged, in Western culture as maybe it is in other cultures, but that doesn't mean that it's encouraged, and there's really no map that says, hey, this is what dropping out looks like, because most of the people that drop out because they're not doing well in school. And then the other percentage of the population that drops out, when Mark Zuckerberg left Facebook, it's a different thing, right? He's got a multi-million-dollar business, right? It's chugging along. That's not what it was for me. It was on a much smaller scale, maybe the way it sort of looks like to a basketball player or something, where it's like you went to school to maybe go professional in this thing, and I sort of got an offer to do that. I got it, but instead of making millions of dollars, I was making $30,000, right? And I had to really do the math and think, okay, the purpose of going to school is to secure some employment or advantage in this field that I'm pursuing, and I've got that, so I'm going to have to do it. But it was terrifying. I mean, my parents were very upset. We didn't talk for a long time. It challenges all the sort of safety nets that we've built up as like a middle-class society.
Mm-hmm. So what was it, though? Was there an opportunity that you saw that pulled you to do this?
So I had an internship at a talent agency, and I'd help them work with some bands. And they sort of said, hey, now we've signed these bands. What if you we can't have you go back to school, basically, because we need your help. So it was this sort of digital transformation in the business, and I knew what I was doing, and in that regard, not in anything else in my life, and so they wanted me not to go back to school, and I really wanted to do this thing they were asking me to do, and so I said, okay, let's do it, and it was, again, scary. You got to realize that just because it works out in retrospect does not mean there was that much indication that it would have worked out at the time.
Right, exactly, and I think that the biggest, I mean, my parents would have been like, okay, we're going to disown you now and don't ever come back, because how are we ever going to tell anyone what you're doing, right? So, I mean, I guess your parents were, kind of supportive in the fact that they actually let you pursue this. I mean, I'm assuming you didn't have a huge blowout with them.
No, we had a huge blowout.
Oh, okay.
I mean, look, I reject the idea that one's parents can let them do anything. Like, at 18, you're an adult. Yeah. You can make your own decisions, and you have to be able to own the consequences. The consequences of my decision was that my parents were very upset. They tried to pull whatever strings they had with me, sort of cutting various things off, and they tried to use the most sort of persuasive of all parental metrics, which is the withdrawal of affection or approval, and it was, it made a very difficult thing even harder. But over time, I think they began to realize their mistake. And I began to realize that, I'm not sure I wouldn't have done the same thing. The role of a parent ultimately is to keep you safe, not necessarily to make you, not encourage you to take risks that may or may not help you thrive as a person.
Right. So then you go into this whole question of, education is changing is the way we know it now. I mean, everything that you learn in school, you can basically learn on your own or online. And so what I think the way education will be taught in the future is also going to change. And I don't think it's going to be
Hopefully.
I don't think I think, moonshot and like.
It's absurd. It's absurd to me that the obligation of the modern parent is to pick up the tab of $100,000 worth of education at the end, after your child has legally become an adult. That's absurd to me.
Right.
And sad. And I understand it because, if you don't do it, are you disadvantaging them? But it's completely unfair to everyone.
Right. Okay, so then the talent agency, and then how did you then sort of network or meet or run into the next stage of your career? And I don't know if it was working with Robert or
they all
Tucker
happened about the same time. I didn't just leave to go to the agency. I'd also met Robert Greene, and he was looking for a research assistant. That was something that I thought was going to happen, but I wasn't totally sure yet. So I sort of took a flyer there, and it ended up coming together around the same time after I dropped out. So I sort of had these two jobs, and I was cobbling together, a decent living at that age, but I was doing exactly what I wanted to do.
Right.
And I felt very lucky in that regard. And then, from Robert was on the board of directors for American Apparel, so, after some time past working for him, he made a referral there. And then this sort of process happened again. And that's what I don't think people realize, is that they think getting a degree is what's going to get them ahead. And that might be true in certain fields that very, very much require those degrees. But knowing a person and doing good work for that person who has the ability to make calls or decisions is ultimately going to be far better than any piece of paper.
Yeah, and if you can get there without having to have that degree or using the recruiting process through the school, then I think that, I think that's all that matters, really. I mean, for me, I went to college, I went to UNC Chapel Hill, and I went to work on Wall Street right afterwards. And just the fact that, I was in the South and I didn't go to an Ivy League school, it was a lot harder for me to network to get up to Wall Street.
Sure.
So it was kind of like one of these things where, hey, if my diploma had said, Harvard or Princeton, then it'd be a lot easier, to get a job like that. So it was, and I don't think I think if you can get there without it, then by all means, right? So yeah, I think it's incredible what you did, and also I think I want to ask you because it takes also a certain level of maturity. I think at that age, for me, when I was 19, I was getting drunk every night, so I didn't even think about sort of, what do I want to do with my life? What do I want to do 5, 10, 15 years down the line? I was just following what all of my peers were doing, having the time of my life, right? So was there a point?
But I think that's one of the problems with this system, right?
Yeah.
Is it infantilizes people who in a previous era would have been fighting wars or having kids or, exploring, into the frontier. And so it was great. I mean, I was 20 years old and all of a sudden I was responsible for myself, and I made a lot of mistakes, certainly, but I didn't get to go drink and dick around because I just took an enormous, it's like I'd burned the boats behind me. I couldn't go back. So I couldn't blow it either.
Yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's also tricky because I'm a finance professional. I work in a hedge fund now, and but I also, I'm sort of a fitness entrepreneur. Like I've written a book that's being published now, and I'm building sort of a fitness product type stuff. But I've always kind of done sort of entrepreneurial stuff in my past, but I've also always had sort of a day job. There's been, in between careers, I've had breaks, but I've always had that day job to go back to. And I think that, there's two camps. And I think that the one camp is really, really overplayed, where they're like, oh, you got to quit your day job and you got to chase your dreams and blah, blah, blah. For me, that's not very practical. And I think that a lot of kids, unless they know, young people, unless they know exactly what they're doing and maybe they're financially secure, I don't necessarily advocate them doing that. Because a lot of times what happens is you do that and then you realize you're way in over your head and you don't know what you've done, and you've given up this great job that has given you the security that you don't have to worry about paying your rent or keeping the lights on. And then all of a sudden you have this added pressure to get your startup, whatever you're doing, successful, right?
Yeah.
This whole concept of chasing money versus the dream, right?
Yeah.
For me, it's always been, okay, let me get some money first so I don't have to worry about that.
Right.
So I don't know.
Well, this is the first period in my life, about the last year and a half, that I haven't had a day job. I was the director of marketing for American Apparel for a very long time, even when I wrote my first 3 books, and I left in 2014. And now I have a consulting company, like I own my own company, but then I'm also a writer. So it's like, in a weird way, I have a similar setup in that I have 2 sources of income. Mm-hmm. So I'm not living or dying off either one. And, I do some investing and stuff as well, which isn't bad. But the idea being, I think, that if you're really good at what you do, you don't need to quit your job to have things on the side, because it doesn't require the full breadth of your capacity in the way that it might for someone who's not quite as good at that same occupation. So for me, I've been able to sort of have multiple irons in the fire, and it's been great because it creates some independence. You're not like, it's not like you're a trust fund kid, but you get to think a little bit more long term about stuff. You don't just have to say, look, I need to take this gig or I can't eat.
Yeah. I think the other problem is, and I'm guilty of this as well, is people get impatient, right? So you kind of, oh yeah, I just want to hit it big, or I just need that lucky break, and you don't realize that, and Robert Greene talks about this in Mastery, sort of, that the people that have achieved this sort of pinnacles of success, they've been working at it for years and years and years. It's not just, it doesn't happen overnight, right? It's not just something like, oh, today I'm going to wake up and I'm going to hit it big because I'm going to be a master at this. It takes years and years.
Well, that's what's so dangerous about that advice of, following your passion. That's like 1/10 of what you need to succeed. It's great to have passion, I suppose, but if it's not combined with some sense of purpose, if it's not also combined with skill, if it's not also combined with a plan, it's just desire.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I want to talk about your book for a bit. The latest one, Ego is the Enemy. I thought it was awesome. I mean, I think it really sort of I felt much more personal to me, I guess. And I don't know if it's because of the way you introed it. You kind of opened the curtain and sort of showed some vulnerability. But
Huh?
I think that for me, and I think Asians are more conservative in general. And, my folks were sort of very conservative, Christian background type, Asians. So, the whole concept of ego was definitely shunned upon. They were kind of like, okay, don't be proud, don't have an ego, don't showboat, so to speak. And I'm not
Right.
sure if that's coming from the Christianity side or the Asian side or whatever, but I was kind of raised that way. So it wasn't like this whole thing like, oh, I'm a parent and I'm going to stroke my kid's ego and say, oh, you're just fine. You're going to be, you're very special. You're really good at whatever you do, even though the kid sucks at it,
Right.
which I think also is an issue these days with some parents that they sort of push that. But I wanted to clarify something. So, I know you talk about ego, and then there's a chapter or so where you talk about pride separately. So
Uh-huh.
the difference between the two, I mean, what, how could you define that very clearly between ego and pride?
Well, I'm sort of defining ego as a collection of some negative traits. I think pride, maybe undue pride, is probably one of those traits. I think you raised a good point. Ego is not one thing, and it manifests itself a little bit differently in different cultures. But what I think is interesting is how often our sort of smug pride and our egolessness is itself a form of ego and pride, right? So, we can think, if we think that we're better than other people because we're not out there showboating, maybe those people actually aren't showboating, they're just striving for something better, and you put yourself in a position where as the sort of quiet person in the corner, you're just judging everyone else. So
Right.
I try to focus less on other people and try to apply it more towards yourself. Like, is this who I am? Is this who I want to be? Am I being honest with myself? Am I being aware about my strengths and weaknesses? And am I presenting myself in an honest, authentic way?
So now that you've sort of written this book, and I mean, I know you follow Stoicism and all that, and do you find it at times difficult to sort of not see everyone through this lens of like, oh, this guy has an ego, and like an ego meter on everyone that you meet and interact with, you know what I mean?
Well, when you write a book, you end up seeing the ideas in that book everywhere, and that's the only way you can make a book. But yeah, of course, look, not people are like, yesterday, I guess, was the vote about Britain leaving the European
Brexit,
Union, and so everyone's like, is this all ego? And it's like, I don't know. That's not my expertise. Certainly not everything is ego. Sometimes things are stupidity. Sometimes people are right to stand on their own and to make decisions. I don't know. So I don't think everything is ego, but I do think we are currently awash in ego, and that it's at the root of many of our problems.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, look, we have a presidential candidate in America who's probably one of the most delusional, thin-skinned, arrogant, and at the same time utterly unqualified human beings to ever covet that office. That is the definition of everything that I'm talking about in the book. Bernie Sanders, is he similar to Trump in a lot of ways? Yes, but I don't think it's ego. I think it's from a totally different place. So you got to make those distinctions.
Yeah, it's funny because even so, the title of your book is "Ego's Enemy," and so I was thinking about, I'm obviously going to do, it's good because I'm going to try to give some of the books that I got away. But then I was like, like my boss could really use this book. And then I was like, wait a minute, this is difficult. This is like not an easy book to give, because literally as soon as you give it, someone sees the title and they're like, hey, what are you trying to say here?
Right. Yeah. No. That's something I've certainly thought about, and we tried to make. Different versions of the book are opened much more harshly. Right. And we sort of realized that was going to suppress people's willingness to press it into other people's hands. Yeah,
right. So in the book, one of my favorite sort of chapters is the Malcolm X chapter and the alive time, dead time thing. And because I relate to that so much, especially, like I said, I've always sort of had a day job, and And there've been times where I've just been miserable and I'm like, oh, I can't deal with this. I want to quit right away. And then I've always sort of, taken the more conservative path and been like, okay, I'm going to just collect this paycheck and sort of side hustle it here. So I think I love that chapter. And I think that sort of ties in a lot with sort of the message that I kind of want to get out there to some of these younger entrepreneurs. So, and that also sort of, you talked about this a bit as well, I think in Obstacles the Way, with regards to when you're in this type of situation where like you really hate your boss or whatever, and trying to actually derive some value out of that experience as opposed to just being miserable, right?
Yes. I mean, look, so this morning I got some very frustrating bad news, and I won't get into it, but it just sort of crushed me in an unexpected way. Like I didn't think I would care about it, and I've just been so burned out from all the work I've been doing. It caught me off guard, and I just got home from traveling, and so I sort of was like, I'm just going to lay around all day, and that's dead time embodied, right? It's like, oh, you hurt me by doing this thing, and now I'm going to respond by wasting one of the days of my life when I don't know how many days I have on this earth. That's a terrible decision.
Yeah.
And you have to catch yourself. And so what I didn't do is what I sometimes do in those situations is just throw myself into working, which is just a way of denying your feelings. I don't think that's productive either. I just said, look, like I'm going to take it easy because I'm not feeling great, but I'm going to read. I'm not going to watch TV all day. I'm not going to, sleep all day. I'm going to actually try to do something that if I had complete freedom over my day, like if I didn't have any responsibilities, I'd probably spend a good chunk of it reading. And so I'm going to treat myself in that regard. So that alive time, dead time concept, which again is from Robert Greene, it's not mine by any means. It's taking a situation that could be wasteful and turning it into something productive.
Right. I think it's brilliant. So you talk about Stoicism a lot, and I think the first person that I sort of was introduced sort of the, not the word, but like looking into the concept of Stoicism more was obviously Tim Ferriss. And I know you basically Obstacles Away is an entire sort of Stoicism-based book. What if you could just in one or two sentences for the layman describe what Stoicism is? How would you put it?
So Stoicism is a practical philosophy that was popular in ancient Greece and Rome, but that doesn't really matter to anyone. I mean, I could give you the names: Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, Zeno. Maybe you've heard of some of those names. It doesn't really matter. I guess what I try to tell people is Stoicism is a philosophy that basically holds as human beings, we don't control the world around us. We control how we respond.
Right.
And it's a philosophy around that singular idea. And it's very empowering if you can live your life that way.
Yep.
It seems disempowering, but in fact it's very empowering.
Right. I think it's such a unique way of reframing your mind and thinking about situations that if you can successfully sort of carve out your emotions and actually believe that mindset, then it really, really does help. So we're coming up on the end here of our call. I want to get one more question out to you.
Okay.
So if you had one piece of advice that you could give sort of a young entrepreneur, whether they're coming out of college or they're working somewhere and they're doing a side hustle, what piece of advice would that be?
Well, I mean, look, I think it would be hard to do better than that. You don't control what happens to you. You control how you respond in terms of a life philosophy and a piece of advice. I think it's so the opposite of most advice out there. But I guess if I was speaking maybe a bit more practically, I would say it's like, look, you're in charge of your own education, and no one's going to magically teach you anything. You're not magically going to pick up the skills that you need. If you're trying to build your own business, you're trying to run a career or a business on the side, it's like the learning is what you need to be doing at this age. Like, you've got time, you've got however long you're going to work at it, however long you're going to be on this planet. But if it's not built on a foundation of knowledge and experience, it's probably not going to work out.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the one sort of actionable thing that I've always told people is sort of like read. And I know you're a huge read, you read voraciously as well, and you have a reading list and whatnot. So, and I think that the amount of stuff that you can learn, I guess, I was writing this fitness book and I was like, look, I've spent 15 years of my life trying to decode fitness, and I've finally done it and condensed it into 200 pages or whatever you have you. And it's like, if you can get someone 15 years of experience in 2 hours of reading, like, why wouldn't you, right? So.
Totally. I mean, I have a quote in Ego from Bismarck where he's saying, any fool can learn by experience. I prefer to learn from the experiences of others. If you're not living your life that way, then you're the fool.
Right. Brilliant. Okay. Ryan, thanks so much. So you're at ryanholiday.net, right? That's your personal, I guess, homepage. I will direct listeners there. So we're going to have this, it's going to roll out in probably the next couple months, probably 6 weeks. And I'll definitely send you sort of an email and link you up. I don't know if are you ever in Asia, or have you ever done any sort of work in Asia?
I gave a talk in Thailand in December.
Okay.
But other than that, I've not been out there much.
Yeah, so Hong Kong is kind of a unique place because first of all, everything's so slow out here, right? So one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast is that, look, I mean, podcasts have been around for over 10 years and really popular, and like no one does them out here. And so I was like,
really?
Yeah. And so I'm working with Invest HK, which is part of the Hong Kong government. I'm like, dude, we got to get on the ball here. Like, no one is doing this. Like, this is so great. And it's, it's content that can be there forever, basically, and anyone can access it. So this is my big push. I'm trying to get this out there. So, I mean, if you're ever, I'd love to have you out here at some point, in the future. And if you're ever in town or in Asia, definitely drop me a line. It'd be great to catch up with you. But thanks so much for your time, Ryan. Congrats again on the book, and
Thank you.
And I wish you all the success.
All right. Good luck with your show.
All right. Thanks, man. Talk to you later.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. All the show notes and links can be found over at jkimshow.com. Come back often and make sure you subscribe, rate, and review. Don't forget to join us next week for another exciting episode of The J. Kim Show. I'd love to hear your comments. You can find me on Twitter at jkimmer, JAYKIMMER. See you guys next week. This podcast is brought to you by Hack Your Fitness, the high achiever's guide to getting ripped in under 3 hours a week. If you're anything like me, you're probably working a full-time job or jobs and trying to find time to balance family life, social life, and last but not least, fitness. Look, I get it. I'm a full-time investor and entrepreneur myself, and father of 2. So how am I able to stay fit year-round without spending hours and hours in the gym killing myself on the cardio machine? After struggling for the last 15 years trying every workout and diet under the sun, I finally designed a system that allows me to achieve and maintain single-digit body fat for life in under 3 hours a week. Cardio not required. Head on over to hackyour.fitness and download my free 13-page guide that teaches you the simple science behind efficient fitness and smart nutrition and gives you everything you need to know to finally take control of your life. That's hackyour.fitness.